Hey Untold Radio Network fans! Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
Good evening. This week we're changing gears a little here on Mysterious Library, and we're checking out the uplifting, if at times heartbreaking, documentary Dave Stevens Drawn to Perfection from director Kelvin Mao. The film examines the life of the famous artist Dave Stevens, who created the Rocketeer and reintroduced the world to 50s pinup model Bettie Page. It's a wonderful film, and I know it has a special spot both in my recollections of my nerd comic book youth, as well as Jason, who remains a comic book artist and writer to this day. So that's what we'll be looking at tonight on Mysterious Library.
Hey,
Howdy.
was it just on my end, or did that that opening video was that weird for anyone else? Because it was weird for me. There
No,
was some weird delays on it. Okay,
maybe, hopefully your internet's not going to collapse and die. That's normally what happens with my internet.
I know that's what I was thinking there. It's like normally that's a you thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, hey, happy Tuesday, everyone. Yeah, this was a great documentary. We're gonna have a lot of fun talking about it. It is a bit of a change up, but it's in honor of 2 different announcements we're gonna make today.
Hmm.
But before we go too far, um, anything new in the world of Dean Bertram?
No, just the normal fall rituals, which I always still enjoy living in America, which I was never used to in Australia. But I do have a fresh off the presses, which I might do now before I
Mhm.
forget to share it. I actually had the author of this book, Maxim Furyk, on Talking Weird on Saturday night. And that's his brand new book, Flying Saucer Esoteric, The Altered States of Ufology. And it's a very thorough and very comprehensive overview of
Mhm.
the history of UFOs and the history of ufology. That's coming from somebody who spent decades studying it. So I
Yeah.
highly recommend Maxim's book. I got a very nice thank you in it as well, which I appreciated being included in the thanks because I consulted on just a couple things. So it was nice of Max to put me in there. But check that out, Flying Saucer Esoteric. And it's also worth going and watching the show which we did this previous Saturday, because it's the
Mhm.
80th anniversary this month of the Philadelphia experiment. So
Oh,
Max,
really?
yeah, Max has written
Oh,
about the
yeah.
Philadelphia experiment in this, as
Yeah.
well as his other book, Coal Region Hoodoo. So we thought, yeah, let's do an 80th anniversary of it. So go check that out. that episode out on the network that you're watching now.
Yeah, excellent. That's that's an interesting one. I'm definitely gonna be looking forward to reading that one.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I have it, and I haven't read it all. I've gone over it though, like, fairly thoroughly. I need to sit down and read it cover to cover, but so far it's great. Just scanning through it, it's very comprehensive. It hits all kinds of things, which I'm really glad it hit, that a lot of books in the field don't hit. So
Hey, that's one of the reasons we're here, right? To let people know about this kind of thing, because it needs to be known. So much of the conversation, cryptozoology, ufology, there's so many pieces that aren't had in the sort of the more popular zeitgeist. It's almost like it's avoided very deliberately. So yeah, that's why we're here and love doing it. Which is going to be an interesting segue into the first announcement.
did you want to say anything about your life first before we do the first announcement? Because I always fail to ask you how your life is. You're always like, how's life in Dean World? And I'm like, well, blah, 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 blah. Can see. Now on with the show.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I don't know that
how
I'm
yours
doing
is.
anything. I mean, I guess we'll kind of talk about it with the announcement, but just a lot of artwork, honestly, kind of doing the drawing thing. Which does tie into the announcement. I am leaving podcasting. I'm retiring from podcasting as a creator. I'll still be doing guest spots when someone needs me on this channel and Texas Front Porch, other things, but I'm going to be turning my time back to artwork, doing books and drawings. Just that's the next step of my, adventure in this space. I'm not leaving the space, specifically, but definitely, getting back to the artwork, doing books. I've got a comic that is being colored right now. I'll be doing the lettering on it this week, and I've got another actually like little comic, sort of a comic book, but it's more of like a collection of daily strips that I've worked on. I'm doing a lot of new work for it as well, called Choopy Rules. It's about a chupacabra and a restaurant that services cryptids and other things like that. A lot of fun.
Fantastic.
So yeah, and of course, I got stuff that I got to do. Book of Revelation, and then things like this, right? Ufology and cryptozoology from a Christian perspective. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Trust me, I'm not going anywhere, but I am just kind of retiring from the podcast creator material. So for, like I said, there's no drama anywhere at all with anyone or anything, because that's always the, one of those things in this space. Everyone's like, who do you have a falling out with? I'm not burnt out. I don't have any falling outs with anyone. I'm not disappointed or angry, or just genuinely feel like God's like, no. You've been here for where you did what you're supposed to do. Now it's time to go back to this and focus on this and take that next step. So that's why I'm doing it. Like I said, there's no drama with anyone, anywhere. Love everyone. In fact, I really do love doing the show with Dean. I love Doug. I thought about, it's like, well, maybe I can stay doing this, and no, I got to take that full step. Sometimes you just gotta, you gotta let go of that branch to, jump. What was the Dark Knight Returns, or no, the Dark Knight Rises, right? You had to take off. You had to take that safety rope off to make that jump, right? That's what I'm doing, man. Just taking that jump. So, it'll be fun. Like I said, I'm not going anywhere. Like I said, y'all have not gotten rid of me. If anything, there's just going to be more me, because then it's just going to be, I'm going to be everywhere. When I come out with a book, I'm going to be on every show you could possibly imagine. So, and then you're going to have books to read. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, I would say you'll be sorely missed, and you will be. I'll certainly miss doing Mysterious Library with you every week, but I know I'll have you on Talking Weird whenever you have anything to share, and I know you won't be a stranger on any of the other shows on this network or throughout the realm. Although I must say, I have thoroughly enjoyed doing Mysterious Library with you. It's been one of the great collaborative experiences of my life. And I don't collaborate well. I've done lots of collaborations with different people, and it's hard to get somebody that you really kind of gel with, and
Yeah.
everything just seems to flow. And with you, it has been just the utmost pleasure. And I know everybody watching the show has certainly enjoyed you, and I hope they've enjoyed our banter, which I guess leads to the next point, and that is that Mysterious Library is also coming to an end. One of the reasons is, quite frankly, I wouldn't want to do it with anybody else. Jason's been fantastic. Who knows if it will ever return in the future? They say never, but
Yeah.
temporarily, at least for the unforeseeable future, or the foreseeable future, perhaps it won't be running. But what will happen is I'll be moving Talking Weird to the Tuesday slot. So everybody who likes watching Tuesday, you'll still have to suffer me, if not my handsome co-host Jason, but it will just be me here doing Talking Weird with different guests every week. And that Saturday slot, Talking Weird won't be running in that 10 p.m. slot on Saturday anymore. But you can keep watching here every Tuesday, 9 p.m. You'll still get me. And occasionally I will twist Jason's arm to pop in. I might even do the occasional Mysterious Library Talking Weird special, twist Jason's arm onto coming back to talk about a book or a documentary or something.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm not going anywhere, guys. I very much, like I said, Dean can't get rid of me now. I know where he lives. Like, it's like, I don't think y'all understand. He's the one who put himself in this situation. So we're gonna do tonight's episode, and then we've got 2 more episodes, and then the first episode of Talking Weird on its new night will be Halloween Eve.
And you're doing that with me, so you'll see Jason.
I was saving that as a surprise.
Oh, I thought that's what you were saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I was letting everyone know. It's like, hey, we've got 2 more episodes of Mysterious Library. You're gonna have a special guest for.
I didn't. I missed.
Oh, wow. This is. We should have talked about that ahead of time.
Yeah. We didn't
anyway, it's so okay. Cat's out of the bag. You get me for 3 more weeks. However, that 3rd week is not really the. I'm going to be a guest, but to commemorate the new step of Talking Weird on Tuesday. So again, you still got to put up with this guy, and then I'll pop in every once in a while when I'm like, "Hey, Dean, I need to hear you say assume for a while."
You never know. I might have to talk you into being the replacement host if I ever get sick or have a crisis as well. My internet fails, and I call you in panic like 5 minutes before the show.
That's what I'm saying. Working. Like, y'all really can't really get rid of me. It's like I'll have to probably do some guest hosting from time to time, knowing how your internet is.
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah.
Most likely. But again, mate, it's been a pleasure, but we'll talk about more of that on the final one. But I guess now we get to talk. And this was your choice, because we said we only had a couple of weeks left, and when we realized this was going, we said, well, let's do a few things we've really wanted to do. And this is something that we talked about, and I knew that you really want. In fact, you said, I really want to do this Dave Stevens documentary. So that's what we're doing for one of our last episodes.
In traditional Jason fashion, I do want to talk about the aesthetics of this particular documentary first. Not obviously the artwork that's discussed, but this feels like a pretty standard, documentary, right? Like, it's not really taking any chances visually per se, but I don't think it hurts it, because the visuals they're giving you are so amazing that it's like, why? You can see the filmmaker's like, well, we could do some fun things, or we could just put up some of the best artwork that's been done in the last 60 years on the screen and let it speak for itself. And they do, and it's gorgeous. And again, this film, again, from an aesthetic standpoint, the filmmaker is not doing anything new or exciting or different, but that's okay, because what he's doing, you need to just soak in that artwork. And it is Dave Stevens, his artwork was absolutely gorgeous, and there's a lot of details about what he did that I had either forgotten or didn't know to begin with. I didn't realize he worked for Hanna-Barbera as long as he did.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That was like, there's a lot of little things you get in there. You're like, oh wow, I didn't realize this was, that he did this.
And he did some of the early Star Wars comics. I didn't know he worked on some of the early Star. I used to read some of those Star Wars comics when I was a kid. I was probably reading Dave Stevens before I knew who Dave Stevens was.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, that was the other thing I kind of took back was, or taken aback was how many inking jobs he took first. Like he really, in as far as the comic world, it was more about inking for him than being the actual than being the penciler. For those of you who don't know, I should probably explain this. Comic books up until very like it's done a little differently now because um the ability to reproduce artwork has gotten so good. There are some comics that don't even do inking anymore, but back in the day, you would do your drawings, and the drawing would be converted to what's called a blue line, and then you'd ink over that blue line, and that's what they would create the pages off of for the for the press. Um, and so it's a very specific skill. It is traditionally right. Um, one of the inside jokes has always been that they're called the inkers or the tracers, but anyone who actually understands artwork will tell you, or comic artwork will tell you, the inker can make or break a good artist. Like one of the most controversial figures in inking, and the fact that exists tells you how deep I am into this thing. Vince Colletta was an artist. I mean, old school. Like when I mean old school, I mean he was there with Kirby and Joe Simon, and like he was there at the birth of Marvel. He was working before Marvel became Marvel. He was an artist in his own right, but he was like, I can do inking way faster. And so people who have opinions on inkers have very stout opinions on Vince Colletta. He's either the greatest inker to ever ink Kirby's work, and I would argue that's actually Ditko, or you hate Vince Colletta and you think he destroyed Jack Kirby's artwork. And there is no one in between except for me. I think he was actually pretty good for what he was doing, and I think there's a lot of things that Vince Colletta understood that maybe a lot of people don't. So, but my point is, an inker can radically change how a page looks. And so when Dave Stevens was doing this ink work for these pages, he was genuinely making them better. He was improving things that a lesser artist would not have done. So when he's breaking in, people are noticing how good his inks are when he gets into the more comic directed field. And from a young age, people saw him like, you've got this. Like at no point was anyone ever like, no. He's like, no, you've got a chance here. Go get some jobs. Go start doing this. And it took him some time. He was self-taught, but the man was a genius. Let me throw some images up here just so you can get an idea of how good his artwork is. Couple pieces. That didn't turn out as well as I'd like. Anyway, the Rocketeer that he created, right? This is mostly what he's known for, and as far as the broader world. But that man, his brushwork, his line work, there's no one better. The only one I could argue that could go toe to toe with him is someone like a Cho, but he's working now, and again, that man's inks are brilliant. But you could tell he looks at Dave Stevens. He still is looking at Dave Stevens to get the effects that he's getting. So one of the things they mentioned is the famous Sheena, Queen of the Jungle cover. Later in his career, he does a lot of pinup work, and what he was famous for is this sort of classic 1930s to 1950s artwork, right? Art Deco, which is the 30s, and then he gets into those sort of Gil Elvgren pinups and things like that. And he almost single-handedly brings all of this stuff back. You had this on your wall, as I recall.
Yeah, that's why I put that up there. When I was a teenager, my wall was pretty much, my bedroom walls were either family inappropriate pinups of women from magazines like Playboy and or comic book artwork. I had wonderful pieces by Jim Steranko, which he'd signed for me when I met him back in the day. And I had this Airboy cover with the Valkyrie Returns or whatever
Yeah.
the story, that issue was called. But it's just a spectacular picture. And I don't think I'm not in the comic book world at all anymore, but I lived and breathed it when I was a teenager. And I think I got that poster. I didn't buy the poster, but Eclipse, which that was one of the titles of, used to do these little kind of samplers that you could pick up for free at comic book stores. So when I went to get my monthly order, I would always pick up the Eclipse samplers, and that was the cover of an Eclipse sampler as well. So I cut it out because it was the most incredible, especially for a teenage boy. I mean, look at that image. She's got this 1911 in her hand, and she looks like this almost perfect woman. And that's something Stevens, I think, did better than any comic book artist I've ever seen. I think Stevens captured the beauty and the feminine mystique and the sexuality and the sensuality of women better than anybody I've ever seen. You can look at his pictures and they're as mesmerizing as a photograph of a beautiful woman. And that's pretty rare, that you can look at a piece of art, unless it's done by some master in the Renaissance, and actually feel that there's life within that art. You can't often look at a comic book drawing of a woman and imagine it's a real woman. At least I can't. But Stevens stuff you could look at and you'd be mesmerized. Like Betty in The Rocketeer was taken from Bettie Page, and that's, as we'll probably get to, how it was Bettie Page was reintroduced into the popular consciousness. As a teenage boy, I was a massive fan of Bettie Page, and that was probably thanks to Stevens reintroducing her. And you would buy Bettie Page magazines at comic book stores. In fact, I'll tell you I'll keep it kind of age appropriate. When I was in New York City when I was 18 and I went to a comic book store, there was a Bettie Page magazine. And I'd already was aware of Betty because of, Rocketeer and other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I bought the magazine, and obviously the owner looked at me and thought, this kid probably isn't 18 and or 21 or whatever the legal age was to buy Bettie Page materials. And I bought, and I walked out. When I got back to my hotel room and was going through my comic books, because I bought a stack, I'm like, what happened to that Bettie Page magazine? And I thought, he didn't sell it to me because it's obviously he didn't think I was old enough to buy it. Now I'm touring America by myself. I'm 18. So if I can tour America by myself, I probably was old enough to buy a Bettie Page magazine. It's not like something horrifically hardcore, but still, I think he looked at me and thought, this kid mightn't be 18, and just rather than embarrass me, he just didn't put it into the brown paper bag of the comic book store. So but my point is, my awareness of Bettie Page came because of the Rocketeer. That's what reintroduced it into the geekery of my teens, was the Rocketeer. That was Betty, and then Bettie Page is real, and that's a big part in the documentary that we're talking about, is the idea that we know Bettie Page so well in popular culture now thanks to Dave Stevens. She'd essentially been all but forgotten, apparently. I mean, I was only on the cusp of knowing who she was because of it anyway, so I don't know how well she was known 5 years, 10 years before. But apparently, that's the reason Bettie Page reemerged as this pop culture pinup icon, was because of Dave Stevens choosing her to be the model, essentially, for the girlfriend of the character of the Rocketeer in the comic books. He modeled her on Bettie Page and even called her Betty. And so anybody who's a Bettie Page fan who didn't find her until, the 80s onwards can probably thank Dave Stevens for that reintroduction of her into popular culture. Yeah.
I mean, to your point, and again, the film does a really great job of showcasing just how profound, because Dave Stevens was a perfectionist. In fact, that's one of the issues, is that we should have had way more material from Stevens, but he was so meticulous. He took so long to do his stuff that's what limited our work. Like, don't get me wrong, Kirby was around for a very, very long time, way longer than Stevens, very, very sadly. But that man could put out work. Like, the reason we've got so much Kirby is because that man was doing multiple books a month. That is insane. Whereas, Stevens was putting out a book every quarter, it seemed like he could not meet a deadline to save his life. So his perfectionism actually kind of drew him to Bettie Page, which for him was like the perfect woman, right? And yes, Emily, completely true. The man, he loved Bettie Page. He saw her as like the ultimate woman. There's a there's several lines in the documentary, which again, guys, go watch it for free on Tubi. It is a great documentary. It
And it's
really
on
is.
Prime as well. If you have Amazon
Yeah.
Prime, you can
Or
watch it there
Amazon
without
Prime.
ads, or if you don't have Amazon Prime, you can go watch it for free on Tubi. And it's a really new movie as well. Like, it's 2022. It's less than a year old, this film.
Yeah,
think, or
I
about a
didn't
year
know it
old.
was out. He was, Horace. Or I'm looking at Horace's comment. I want to get to Horace's comment because it's a great comment, or a great question. But yeah, Dean was like, "Hey, did you know about this?" And it's like, "No, I did not." Horace, yes, that's what his artwork was. In many ways, what Dave Stevens did, and here's the thing, he's not a household name. In fact, most people who know him, if you know his name, it's because you're a hardcore kind of geek. What he did was he brought out that sort of 1930s pinup artwork and that style. He brought it back. He reintroduced the sort of a newer age to the Flash Gordon style high adventure, right? That was all but gone until he came along and he brought it back. Like Airboy is a very, very old property that keeps switching hands, and it's, I think, technically in the I think it's in the public domain because he was forgotten as a character. Yes, Nancy Malcolm. Yes, Bettie Page was a real person. She died actually relatively recently.
And I think the great joy of the documentary is, imagine having been such an incredible fan of a woman from like the 50s or whenever Betty was big, right? And then having modeled the hero of your comic book after her, the heroine of the comic book after her,
Yeah.
the girlfriend of the hero in the comic book was physically modeled after you because Dave Stevens drew the Rocketeer character. It looked exactly like Dave Stevens. It was clearly
Yeah.
Dave Stevens living this alternative 30s life where he had a rocket pack and got into all kinds of adventures. His girlfriend was Bettie Page. And then he tracks Betty down. She lives near him in LA all this time. And he becomes the best friend that Bettie Page ever had. Like, he takes Betty to get her groceries. He gives her money from the sale of the Rocketeer. He chases down other people who are using her images and makes them pay Betty. And Betty writes him these lovely letters. They hang out all the time. She signs all these things. The best friend I ever had. She absolutely loved Dave Stevens, and Dave Stevens clearly loved her. And you know what? That would be a spectacular Hollywood movie. Do you know what I mean? Like a platonic love story, like Dave Stevens finding Bettie Page and then them becoming like buddies. Can you imagine how great a platonic love story movie that would be? It would be so good. Hollywood needs to make it. Wouldn't even have to be a big budget movie. You know, somebody needs to make that film.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing. So yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, Bettie Page was a real person. She was a 50s burlesque vaudeville kind of, she did a lot of pinup work. The thing about Bettie Page is that she was breathtakingly gorgeous, but she also they say in the film, I think, and I haven't really heard it said this way, but I think it's perfect. She was the ultimate bad girl next door. Like, she was never overly one way, but she had, her pictures, she was so happy. Like, you could feel her joy, right? Like, that's like, she was that for him. And for a lot of people, sort of that very ultimate, she was the ultimate pinup girl, right?
And if the girl next door was a fetish model who had a genuine smile and was smiling all the time, that's Bettie Page.
That's Bettie Page.
Like, it's a wonderful combination of this American vibrance and youthful vitality and smiling, while being often clothed in fetish wear and doing things which were borderline naughty, because back then it was probably far more, now you probably just have to turn on Netflix and you'd see something 100 times worse. You know what I mean?
No, exactly.
Any Bettie Page photography, but it was kind of on the, it was risque in the 1950s, the Bettie Page stuff. But so I think that ticked a lot of boxes for a lot of people, because here's this beautiful girl next door, but she's always smiling and she always looks really happy, but she's also in fetish wear, so it really, I think it probably got into people like Dave Stevens' head when they were kids seeing this stuff.
It's exactly what it was.
Yeah, and it was like forevermore. Bettie Page was his perfect, ideal woman.
And like you said, towards the end of his career, he was doing a lot of like these pinup covers again, like Sheena and all the others. And and that really sort of became the bulk of his comic work, because he never left doing, like, he worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark as no, Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Yeah,
Temple of Doom. No, he already did that too.
he did Raiders as well, and I think
Yeah.
supposedly, according to the documentary at least, which I didn't know, Spielberg liked his artwork so much, he would say, take your time, and Lucas, who was the producer, just wanted to just hasten it up, would always be telling Stevens, come on, this is a storyboard, it just has to be stick figures, essentially, move it. But then Spielberg would come back and go, no, take your time, because Spielberg wanted to take it away and look at the storyboarding and then actually use it, not just necessarily for not for angles and everything, but the actual conceptuality within that, in the things Stevens was drawing, had this massive impact on the ultimate look
of the film
of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So these are the things that I didn't know about Stevens. I had no idea.
Neither did I. I didn't know that. Like, he again probably helped him get The Rocketeer made as a film, was his work in Hollywood. And the fact that he never stopped doing a lot of that work to pay his bills, because the comic stuff never really paid off, which is a very common story in the comic field. It's very, very rare for people, particularly even the really talented people, to really get what they're owed for the work that they do.
He was getting $150 a page is what they said. So if he did a Rocketeer comic,
pencil,
story,
ink,
everything,
write the story, color it, he got $150 a page. I'm sorry, to do all of that, like getting $150 a page.
And this is world class. This might be the greatest comic book art of the time. And this is the money you're getting.
Yeah.
And people would say, why don't you quit everything else and just do Rocketeer? And he'd say, there's an old audio interview, and he's like saying, just economics. I can't afford to quit everything and just do Rocketeer. I couldn't pay the bills.
Yep. And to that point, like, this, I want to go. So I think we've covered the Bettie Page stuff enough. I kind of want to go back to one of the things that is very, very, he's a fan. He's not just a fan.
You can never cover Bettie Page enough.
No.
Never cover Bettie Page enough. But sorry, go on to the fan and everything.
Why would you ever want Bettie Page covered? Anyway, moving on.
Family show.
I'm winking and nodding.
Like, I'm gone in a couple of weeks, whatever. So.
Yeah. But it's not how we're going out. Like, he was friends with Jim Steranko. Everyone there that is interviewed in this film is somebody very profound in the art world. It may even be bigger names to, like, the normies. When the thing about Dave Stevens is he changed comics in a way that I can't really properly explain to people who just aren't in that world a little bit. But he single-handedly brought back those high adventure, classic sort of pulp stories and that style of artwork. The Gil Elvgren, he brought all of that back into the genre. And the thing is, he's the artist's artist. And it's like, there are the comedians that everyone knows, and there's the comedians laugh at, right? Dave Stevens is the artist that the artists want to be. They're the ones that he is the artist the artists look at. His friends, the people who were in his life, these are the people who sing his praises, are some of the most profound artists still working in comics, and were working in the comics at the time. Again, like people like Steranko, Adam Hughes, and just again, he's that person that, if you're actually in the field and you're working, because you're like, the man was brilliant. He was a perfectionist, and we should have had 10 times his output. But the problem is, if we did, we wouldn't have gotten what we got.
Yeah, that's a constant point.
Brilliant.
His friends make in the documentary again and again, or particularly his fellow artists who worked on projects with him, is the whole thing would look done. And then one guy jokes about, except there was an eyebrow he didn't like, so he erased it and redid it 10 times. Or there's a legitimate story about, apparently there was a dog paw in a final panel or something. There was this dog in one of the stories, and he didn't like the paw, and he kept doing it and raising it and doing it again and again and again. And as a result, the Rocketeer output is considerably small, considering the significance kind of Stevens. And there was a Disney movie, which we might get to, about the Rocketeer. I had a Rocketeer toy as a kid. Well, as a kid, as a
Oh, yeah.
teenager. I bought it more as a, a teen fan than as a kid. It's just because it was available. But it became a toy I mean, there was literally a toy franchise, spurred off of it as well. So it was a considerable, I guess, what do you call it? There was a considerable franchise which kind of sprang out from it in the market anyway. It was a genuine title. It was a big product, but yeah, there's not that many Rocketeers. Like I think you can almost get a book which collects them all, and it's only about that thick. Like it's not.
Oh, yeah.
There's
It's
not very
insane.
many of them. It's not like Spider-Man or something, or anything
No.
from Marvel or any of the traditional hero characters we know, where there's a never-ending output of them.
Or
He
Steve
was somebody.
Or Steve Ditko, if you were to get, like, you couldn't, like, it's almost impossible to collect all of his, and this is just his self-owned, his self-published work. You get multiple volumes like that thick of Steve Ditko, just his personal stuff, not the stuff he did for Marvel or DC. Same thing with Kirby.
Well, he maintained ownership of these kind of titles,
Yes,
and that's
he
a
did.
wonderful thing. I mean, so many people, of course, there's the Marvel tale about how Kirby created almost all of the major Marvel characters and got pretty much kind of raw dealed, and then later there were court battles and everything else for Kirby to try to reestablish some rights to these things. But a lot of people who create characters don't maintain the ownership of them. But that's something else which really I think is significant about Dave Stevens and the Rocketeer, that it's his baby and it remained his baby. He was never something that he signed away the rights to. It was always his. It was such a personal project too. It would have felt so wrong for it to have left his hands, not to have. He was really the Rocketeer,
Yeah, no, he was. Well, and to your
rare.
point, like he's something that doesn't really stand out. But the Rocket, for most people, but the Rocketeer was because it was creator owned, is one of the first very early and successful. Again, it was successful, just wasn't as successful as Disney wanted for the amount of money they put into it. But this is one of the first independent comics that became a film. Right? Without the success of the Rocketeer, you don't have things like The Crow, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was independent at the time, that had already gone on its own track, right? But so that's kind of a different story. But like, you don't get things like The Crow,
Spawn, maybe
Spawn. Yeah, you don't get Spawn. The investment in Spawn. You certainly don't get Road to Perdition, History of Violence, things like that. So yeah, I mean, he was really important in a lot of ways. Going back to the thing about him redoing that paw over and over again, they said everyone said his favorite artist tool was the eraser. I could not stop laughing at that line when I heard it. I was literally just laughing because I know exactly what they mean. I know what they mean when they say that, because that's a problem I have. I'm not anywhere near as good as Dave Stevens. Real quick. Emily asked if he was playing off of Iron Man to create Rocketeer. No.
I was about to answer that myself, yeah.
Yeah, so no, that's not what happened. What he did was he was playing off of the old Commander Cody and the old Rocket, his hero films
serials,
and serials, yeah. So that's what he was playing off of. This was a loving homage to those serials and those early pulps. This sort of, Flash Gordon kind of stuff. That was
apparently, just quickly, his first version looked like Commander Cody. He was just going to do Commander Cody, and then he thought it was copyright free or that it had entered the public domain, but he wasn't sure. So then he's like, "Well, I'll just change it up a little bit," and that's when he redesigned the Rocketeer, changed the name and everything. And thank goodness he did, because if you look at Commander Cody, it looks like he just got a hollowed out bowling ball on his head or something. It's just shaped.
Yeah, it's not
this kind of sleek, aerodynamic 30s, Art Deco kind of looking helmet or something. It's very different.
Yeah, no, the Rocketeer, the design was brilliant, and it is the most stunning aspect. And again, that was one of the things I liked the most, was because he was so heavily involved with the film. It's when you look at the film, you are looking at a real life Dave Stevens drawing. The biggest change they made was in his backpack, was the design of the actual rocket pack. That was like the biggest overall change from what Dave Stevens created. But if you look at Dave Stevens artwork of the Rocketeer, like that's not the Rocketeer, that's someone else, but there we are. Like that's him. Like that's what got on film. Was his work. So, and it's brilliant. Again, it's absolutely gorgeous. But going back to this idea that he was sort of like the artist is, look at who. Oh, Commando Cody. Sorry, Commando, not Commander.
And just
I'm sorry,
quickly,
Commander. I'm sorry, Commander Cody. That's from Star Wars. He's one of the clone troopers. Commando
there you
Cody.
go.
Correct. Thank you.
And of course, Billy Campbell was cast to play the Rocketeer character because he
Yes.
looks like Dave Stevens. So in the Disney movie, they cast somebody who, well, obviously, if you're casting somebody who looked like the Rocketeer, they're going to look like Dave Stevens anyway, because it was essentially himself. And apparently, Campbell and Stevens became very good friends on the set of that. And in the documentary, maybe we'll save that to the end, but Campbell doesn't appear, but he reads something at the very end of the documentary, which is quite potent. And I think it's particularly cool that they got Campbell to read that, which was
I liked that. I'm not going to say I cried, but I definitely had allergies at the end of this.
Yeah, the ending is pretty hard. It's pretty heartbreaking, really. And that's something I guess we should touch on a little bit as well, is that Stevens dies when he's like 53 or 52 or something. Like he's only early 50s when he goes. And he's somebody who still is this incredible creative force. He'd been fighting the leukemia for some time, and he'd go to cons and he'd get blood transfusions so he could be there 4 days signing autographs for the fans. And he kept producing, but eventually it got the better of him. But he's somebody that's, had he lived longer, we probably would have gotten incredible additional output from this human being. It's one of those stories where somebody's cut off far earlier than ideally anybody would have wanted, because there was decades of work that would have amazed us still. In fact, he was such an amazing artist. Imagine being arguably the greatest comic book artist / inker / writer of your generation, and then still being so dissatisfied with your creative growth that you go back to art school to learn how to paint classically. Like who at the top of the game decides, I'm going back to school because I want to be better? So imagine if we'd had like another 20 years after he'd gone back to school.
I know.
It's just mind-boggling what we lost, really.
Let's compare him with Frank Miller for a second. And it's a little unfair of me, but give me a second on this. I have a point I'm going to. Frank Miller, very distinctive artwork. So I don't want to compare them from an artwork style, but like it's very clear in the early, about the same time the movies are coming out, and a little bit before that, Frank Miller bought into his own crap. Like he really did. He bought into his own hype, and it's like you can tell that when he's doing his work in the 80s on Spider-Man and on particularly Daredevil. Daredevil was his breakout role,
right?
And Wolverine, and then he gets into Sin City. Like he when he really, really becomes who he is, right? You can tell he's looking at Neil Adams. He's looking at Will Eisner, very specifically Will Eisner. He loves Will Eisner, and you can see it in his layouts and the character designs. Like it's very clear who he's pulling from. And then at some point he starts looking at himself, and it becomes this sort of snake eating its own tail, where now his artwork looks like it's a parody of himself. But Dave Stevens doesn't do that.
No, he just gets better and better.
He just gets better. And that's how he's like, I'm going back to arts, or I'm going to art school. Because he never attended art school. He was always self-taught. His entire point was, I need to get better. So instead of doing what a lot of artists have done, very sadly, which is they buy into their own hype, and they're like, well, this is me, this is what I'm going to do, and they just stop growing. He's like, I'm going to push myself even further to become a better artist. Guys, that is as egotistical as the dude was, and he did have an ego. And because, I mean, the man knew how to make a presence, he knew how to do, like, that's part of what he was, very much a showman. And you have to have that kind of an ego to do that. there's a profound sense of humility you have to have as an artist who is that good to say, I need to get better. If I was a tenth of the artist Dave Stevens is, or Dave Stevens was, I'd think I'd arrived. I'd think I was the greatest thing on sliced bread. I would never think about trying to become better. Dave's like, I cannot tell you how profound, the profound level of humility you have to be that good and say, I'm not good enough. I'm going to go back and learn something new.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Although I'm a bit of a Frank Miller fanboy as well, because
Mhm.
he and Alan Moore really changed comics forever. The combination release of Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen around the same time,
Oh, yeah.
it revolutionized. I mean, I was a kid reading it. I was in high
Mhm.
school, and I read them issues as they came out. I didn't buy them later as graphic novels.
Mhm.
I read Dark Knight Returns and
Oh,
Watchmen
yeah.
issue by issue as they were released. And even then, even though I was only mid-teens, I knew I'd read something which was, and this is about Dave Stevens, so I won't go too off field, but
Yeah.
and I was a Dave Stevens fan then too, but I realized I'd read something, both of those comic books, something so fundamentally different to anything I'd ever read as a fanboy, that there could never be anything that could compete to those storylines perhaps again. I knew there'd been a fundamental change in
Yes.
comics, and Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns changed the face of comics forever, really. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's sophisticated. But I think on the other side, I think Stevens is almost the reverse as well there as well, because when people like Moore and people like Frank Miller are becoming really self-reflective on the whole comic book genre and
Mhm.
mixing up the tropes and redefining it, and it's becoming darker and weirder.
And
Dave Stevens is
deconstructing
over,
those tropes,
yeah,
yeah.
David Stevens is over here still having fun and writing something for people that just
Yes.
want to have a fun ride. So they're very, it's ironic that you brought them up, because they're
Mhm.
very different aspects of comic books at that time. They may have
Yeah.
seen the world very differently, and I think Stevens essentially saw the world as this wonderful romantic place where there was all this potential and all this
Mhm.
possibility. And one of the things I love about the documentary is how it doesn't shy away
Yeah.
from talking about the centrality of his relationships with women. Like Brink Stevens, who went on to
Oh,
become
yeah.
a considerable scream queen, was his first, I guess, great love. It was his only wife. That I
Mhm.
think it was the only woman he ever married. He was certainly with many other
Yeah.
women, but Brink Stevens was so formative in so much of his artwork by posing for so much of that early artwork that he did. Later, he had relationships with more models and relationships with more women, and he was this
Mhm.
incredible romantic who loved women so much and loved his
Yeah.
interactions with women so much that it formed, I think, some of his stories as well, because they're very romantic. Like the
Oh,
Rocketeer
they
is a
are.
boyfriend-girlfriend story, really.
Yeah.
As Brink Stevens said, "This is our story."
Mhm.
This is his romantic story. And I
Yes.
think that's very
Yes.
different. Again, that's so different to Dark
Mhm.
Knight, and it's so different to The Watchmen,
Yeah.
Two different sides of the potentiality of where comics can take us.
I would not have juxtaposed but you're right. That's exactly what was going on is Alan Moore, Frank Miller, there were particularly Alan Moore, who hates. It's interesting because he actually doesn't hate superheroes. He loves superhero comics because he thinks they're supposed to be optimistic, right? They're supposed to show us, but they were over there deconstructing heroes and then Dave Stevens is like, "How about we give you?" He's like, "Nah, let me give you something bright and shiny and optimistic and, like you said, very
Right.
romantic." He
Yeah.
was a romantic, right? It's funny. There's a scene, like you said, they don't shy away at all from his relationships with women. I do think he got married. I think he got married a second time. But one thing is, it was the second funniest line to me outside of the eraser. Nothing's funnier than that eraser line. But that's for me. Is they talking about how they would go to these strip clubs and they're like, it was the most wholesome. He said it was the most wholesome. He's like, going to a strip club with Dave Stevens was the most wholesome event you could possibly imagine, because and you see it, it really translates in his artwork. I'm gonna say something that's gonna seem weird to people, but you can tell when an artist actually likes what he's doing, or when he, particularly women. I see a lot of artists and they draw women and they're like, oh, it's hot and it's sexy. And I'm like, he doesn't actually like this person. Like, he doesn't like what he's doing. He doesn't like what he's drawing. But there's joy because even when he's doing stuff where the women are scantily clad or nude, there is a love for the female form. There's a joy that just absolutely, you see it in the artwork. There's
And
a
you see it in
joy.
the eyes of those characters as well. So
Yes.
they're all like, their bodies are perfect and they're all gorgeous,
Mhm.
but there's a light in the eyes of Stephen's women,
Mhm.
which I don't think is in the eyes of other people trying to also do, you
They're
know,
not.
soft erotica or sexy superheroes, but there's something about Stevens. And one of the reasons, incidentally, is I do think he loved women. The other thing is that he was somebody he was an attractive man. He had an incredible amount of experience with women. So he knew women very well. He knew women in romantic ways very
Mhm.
well. So he didn't have any animosity. He wasn't the guy who might have wanted the beautiful woman over there and never achieved her, so has this weird version of what she's like. The model he's
Yeah.
probably been with. Do you know what I mean? It's probably his girlfriend that you're looking at
He
on the
dated
page.
that model, right? It's
Yeah,
because he
exactly.
still worked with oh, what was her name? I
Brink
forgot her name.
Stevens for
Brink
yeah,
Stevens. Yeah,
they
he
broke
worked
up in the early '80s and they stayed
friends.
they divorced in the early '80s. They stayed lovers, Brink
Yes.
says in the movie, and friends, and worked
Mhm.
together throughout all of the '80s. And
I
that
mean,
says
that
a lot
tells you
about
something.
Stevens as well. I mean, I don't think divorce
Mhm.
is a good thing. I mean, I'm divorced,
No.
but I don't think it's a good thing. But the fact that he could divorce and then he remains this incredibly close relationship with his
Yeah.
ex-wife. He clearly
That's
was a man who adored women. And I don't
yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, that's probably a better part of my life story as well. So I associate with Stevens in that capacity. I
Mhm.
wish I had Stevens' talent, but I certainly understand Stevens' love
Mhm.
of women. I don't think I've ever, and I've been a comic book fan. Like I said, I don't engage anymore. It's too expensive and it's too
Yeah.
woke, and I'm not interested. But as a teenager, into my
Mhm.
probably late teens, early 20s, I never saw anybody who drew a woman who you could see he loved women and understood women the way Stevens did.
Yeah.
Nobody.
There's like, yeah, I think you're 100% correct. Like, he did not have he loved the female form. Um it's like I said, you can tell when an artist actually likes what he's doing, or she, and there's actually several very prominent female artists that were inspired or worked with Dave Stevens. But like I said, you can tell when an artist likes what he's doing, or she's doing. And because they bring that to, like, you can feel it in the artwork. And Dave, that man just loved what he was doing. And, I mean, there's the obvious, but you can tell, like, a real artist catches. Leonardo da Vinci once said that it is not the job of the artist is not to catch what is seen, but what is unseen. Dave Stevens could catch what was unseen. He caught it in the comic page. He did it in the covers. He did it in his pinups. He caught something that was unseen. Right? This is not a moral, claim about pinups or anything like that. But just as speaking as an artist, the man was brilliant, and he could catch that something that he was conveying things. Let me bring up that one page again. No pun intended. Um, like, you feel this page, right? Like, and by the way, he did that lettering versus the Rocketeer at the top like that. It's so hard to find someone who can do the lettering and the artwork the way he was doing it. Like, that's really hard. Usually those are two very, very different skill sets. And he just, you can feel that page. They were showing a lot of his inked work and a lot of the work he was doing. And like, I'm watching, I was like, dude, that's Wally Wood, right? Like, there's a cover he does where the people are in space, and I'm looking at how he does. I'm like, that's Wally Wood. And this goes back into the artists that popped up throughout the thing. Like, he knew Will Eisner. He met these people, Frank Frazetta. Again, Wally, like, he knew these people. These
Jim
are
Steranko and him were
Jim
buddies.
Steranko. Harlan Ellison wrote the introduction to the collected edition that he did of the Rocketeer. If you don't know who Harlan Ellison is, he's probably one of the most prominent and important sci-fi writers of the 20th century that you've never heard of.
He was the person who attacked Ray Palmer. I'm not a big Ellison fan because of his putting poor Palmer on the spot. But that's a song for another time.
That's a song for another time. But yeah, again,
But yes, a very
yeah, it was.
significant sci-fi author, Harlan
Yeah.
Ellison was for sure.
So yeah, again, I mentioned this earlier. There's always the comedian like Norm Macdonald, where it's like you look, he's like, he was so brilliant. He should have been bigger, but the people who listen to him are the actual comedians. Dave Stevens was an artist's artist. That man had a gift. He was taken too soon, and the people who the people who will never complain about his artwork are the people who make the art, because they recognize him for what he is, or for what he was and what he did. And he was in many ways, he's the most profound and influential artist of the late 20th century, and most people, even in comics, don't know who Dave Stevens is. But he brought back Bettie Page. He brought back the old school pulp adventure hero. He was an independent artist. He maintained his independence and in his creator-owned work. And he's one of the first true independent comics artists and creator to get his stuff made into a film. The man is profoundly influential. He was gone too soon, and this documentary is very much worth the watch, even if you're not a comics fan.
I agree that the Norm Macdonald analogy was a good one, but you know who he makes me think of even more, and that's Bill Hicks in the comedian world. Like, Bill Hicks is this person that shaped comedy, but most people don't know who Bill Hicks is anymore. And I think Dave Stevens is kind of the same in the comic book world. Every comedian still knows who Bill Hicks is and thinks he was one of the greatest comedians of all time. Everybody in the comic book world still knows who Dave Stevens is and thinks he was one of the greatest. And by the way, as a little aside, I used to draw comics and things when I was a teenager. I thought maybe I don't have your talent, Jason, so I didn't go in that direction. But I tried inking for a while as well, and it, compared to penciling, it's unbelievably difficult. And Stevens didn't do the type of inking I was doing, which was the traditional or the more used pen type inking. He did brush inking.
Yes.
He used brushes to do this.
Yes.
And apparently that's something which is pretty rare and very difficult to do.
Oh, it is. As someone who does brush work from time to time, although now you can buy pens that sort of do the whole thing, so you don't have to have all the issues with the brushes. But yeah, as someone who's done it, who is classically trained, right? Yes, brushwork is just so hard. It is so hard to do. Again, the man was a master draftsman. In a just world, people, when they go through art history, they would look at people like Da Vinci, but they would also look at him. Like, that man's draftsmanship was second to none, and it shows. And the skill he brought to the medium will never be surpassed.
And we should say, thank you to
thank you
Bones too for the super sticker. Thank you. We very much appreciate it.
It is appreciated. Thank you, sir. Well, this is, I guess this wraps up the
third
to last Mysterious Library.
2 more after this.
Yep.
It's been a heck of a ride.
It has. I've had a lot of fun. And don't get me, guys, the last episode is going to be us just talking, right? And talking about what's happened over the last year. And again, I've had a lot of fun. This was very important. Again, I'll save all the mushy stuff for that episode. So, but yeah, it's there we are. That's the end of it. Again, go watch it.
Yeah, and I think in the last one too, and the people should definitely go and watch Dave Stevens' Drawn to Perfection, because it is an incredible documentary. But I think in the last one too, we're going to just chat, but we're also going to talk about the type of journey as far as the points we were interested in hitting, what we think was the value, what we think is the takeaway of the show, what were the things which were the central themes, because there were themes in there with people paying attention. There were things Jason and I revisited and were always quite conscious of wanting to talk about. So yeah, listen to the last one, but listen to next week's as well. Next week's is going to be an interesting
it's going to
ride.
be spectacular.
Yeah, something different as well, I think, but we'll save that for next week. We're not even going to tell you what it is. We know what it is, but
we do.
Yeah.
On that note, guys, we'll catch you next time. Behind the Card Catalog. Good night.
Bye.